And I mean, I love the scene where they go swimming too. And it's when the Iron Giant goes for the cannonball and Dean's reading the
Yep.
newspaper.
Dean just puts the newspaper back up as if
It's a
that's a force
perfect cut
field.
right there because you get like the wide shot of like the water spouting up in the air and then the wave starting to come up and then it cuts right to Dean with his newspaper in front of his face and there's just a wave like 3 times taller than him about to like wash him out. And
Yeah,
then another
absolutely a
great
tidal wave.
line delivery of like he gets washed out into the
Yep.
road.
Hey, buddy. Yeah, you're in the
Yeah.
road. Yeah.
He goes, okay. Just drives on. This
All
is
right.
funny. Welcome back to the Great American Movie Review, where we review great American movies.
My name is Kyle.
And I'm Micaiah. This is a Movie of the Week style podcast where we take turns picking films and we talk about them. This week, I have selected the 1999 animated film, The Iron Giant. The Iron Giant is about a boy who finds and befriends a giant alien robot that crash lands in small town America in 1957. The film is the first feature of director Brad Bird, who would later go on to make films such as The Incredibles, Ratatouille, and Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, among others. While The Iron Giant is a widely beloved film by those who have seen it, the film was a financial disaster, only taking in $23 million on a $70 million budget.
Which I find surprising because there's a list of reasons why it was a
Oh, yeah.
disaster. Marketing is one of them.
Huge one.
It also seemed just derivative for something at the time, and also while I do find the animation to be charming in a way, I could see in a trailer a lot of people thinking that the animation is not good even for the time.
I mean, have you seen those trailers?
I have not seen those trailers,
They're
but just
awful.
if you're just yeah, if you're just taking some of the things out of context without even like telling what the story is going to be about, I can absolutely see how somebody would not want to watch it.
Yeah. So, for Network, I watched the director's commentary. This one I watched on the special features for the Blu-ray. There was a documentary that was an hour long about the making of the Iron Giant that I watched, which is really interesting and gives a lot of insight into the development and then the eventual kind of marketing failure of the movie that uh, kind of led to where it ended up. Unfortunately, not really making the impact that I think it could have. And a lot of that I think is really due to the fact that Warner Brothers did not really have a good hold on what they wanted to do with animation in general. Because before this, you had Disney basically dominated animation from the 20s through the 80s. You know, the only other real animation studio that I can think of is why can I not think of the name of the guy?
So
The it's the American Tail. What's his name? Don Bluth. The Don Bluth
yeah,
animation
Don Bluth,
was the
yeah,
only real competition to Disney throughout the
Secret of Nim,
80s.
right?
At least, yeah, Secret of Nim, Land Before Time,
Yep.
An American Tail. There were so many. Those are just some of the
Well,
bigger ones. Anastasia.
obviously, DreamWorks wasn't in full force until like Shrek and
No.
the early 2000s, but they did have Prince of Persia, no?
You mean the Prince of Egypt?
Prince of Egypt, that's it, not Prince of Persia. The Sands
Yeah.
of Time. Yep, yeah, that movie.
Yeah,
Wow.
like DreamWorks was. I mean, all of the other studios were really trying to get in on animation at this point in time because you had the
Especially
Disney,
2D,
right? Because
because
you
only Pixar did CGI.
right, because well, starting in the late '80s with like The Little Mermaid, you got the start of the Disney Renaissance, where these movies were making hand over fist, you know, and
Yeah.
really successful. Because and then you also had the first ever Best Animated Picture nomination for Beauty and the Beast, and you had just a lot going on. The Lion King came out in '94. Then you had Toy Story coming out in '95. So studios were,
They also weren't just box office hits. They were some of the best movies to have been made,
yeah, they're great
like The
films.
Lion King.
Yeah, like The Lion King, like Beauty and the Beast, like Aladdin.
Yep.
Yeah, and even the other studios were all just trying to figure out what they were even trying to do with this, and Warner Brothers wasn't having a lot of success with it, and
I can't think
unfortunately,
of another Warner Brothers
there were a
animation
few. There
movie.
was some like fantasy one, something Camelot. I don't remember, but none of them did very well. It's actually kind of interesting when you think about how many animated movies come out every year right now. It's just so many. It's like a glut of them that you just can't get away from them. But you look back at 1999 at like the animated movies that came out in 1999, and there are like maybe five you've heard of, and
Yeah.
unless you're like a really big animation fan, because you have the Iron Giant, obviously, Tarzan. Somebody's mowing the lawn outside. We might have to wait a couple minutes.
That's okay. No, it's ASMR.
Well, it's just
It's
annoying
it's
that's
lawn.
happening now. Well, either way, in 1999, you had the Iron Giant, you had the big competition from Disney being Tarzan, and then you had South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. And those were kind
Hey,
of,
blame Canada on that one.
yeah, blame Canada. And then it goes from there, it just like kind of dwindles out very fast. Like the kind of animated movies that you have some Japanese films that probably didn't even get distribution in the US, and like some Ghibli stuff. I think one of the like my neighbors, the Yamadas, or one of those came out around that in that year, but I don't even think it got
Yeah.
a US release then. So it's just kind of like most of the US and theatrical animation stuff was there just wasn't a lot of it. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of interesting to look back at that period of time in animation. It's also weird too because you had a lot of experimentation with CG and hand drawn combined. You see that in all of the Disney movies, starting at Beauty and the Beast, actually, going into especially with like Tarzan, and you see that in the Iron Giant as well. But I think as far as the Iron Giant goes specifically, though, just as its own kind of movie, despite its failings, like I said, this is a movie that is just absolutely beloved by everybody who's seen it, really. I don't really know anybody who just saw this movie and was like, yeah, it's okay, it's good. You know, like everybody that I know that has seen this movie is like, it's incredible. And they try to show everybody else this movie because it is. It's so good. And
So
unfortunately,
I will say I do like this movie quite a bit actually. But as a kid, it I was very mostly apathetic towards it. I recognized it was a good movie, but it it had no I had no passion for it really.
so yeah, interestingly for me as well, I was scared of everything as a kid, and the scene where he's in the woods looking for the Iron Giant, and he
Hmm.
finds him, the Iron Giant gets electrocuted on like the power grid and stuff. That scene terrified me so much as a kid that I never watched the movie
That
past
you
that
never
point.
watched it again.
So I only really
Oh,
discovered,
you only watched like the first little
yeah,
bit.
so I only really discovered
Wow.
my love for this movie as an adult watching it. It was only,
Wow.
I think it was my first year of college that I kind of revisited it, and I was like, "This is incredible! I love this movie." And it was only as an adult that I actually got to establish that love of that movie. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of, yeah, it's an interesting thing. As a kid, it didn't grab me because I was too scared of it, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it's just a wonderful piece of animation, and Brad Bird as a director for animation, he is kind of, in far as filmmakers in general, I'm a huge animation fan. Truly do believe animation to be, specifically hand drawn animation, to be like the truest form of filmmaking. It is pure creation, and it is literal images. You are
Yeah.
not like having the illusion of images brought about by a camera recording something. It's literal images that are
Yeah,
played next to
it's
each other.
it's pure art and
Right.
it's in its truest form because you're combining two different kinds of art together
Yes.
to form a
So
project.
it's almost the purest essence of what motion pictures are, and for that, animation is very feels very personal to me because of how much movies mean to me. And this movie is able the Brad Bird as a director, as a filmmaker. I'm into the things that he's into because he has this kind of retro sensibility. Here, 1 second.
To this and like The Incredibles, yeah.
The lawnmower behind me is just so loud. I'm just gonna wait a minute.
I mean, I can bring up the fact that so Brad Bird definitely has two of my favorite Pixar movies under his belt. Actually, probably my one and two being Ratatouille and The Incredibles. which is no small thing compared to like there's Wally, which is recognized sometimes as the best. I'd still put The Incredibles and Ratatouille above it though, even though it is a very close third. There's Toy Story 2, Toy Story 1, Toy Story 3, Up. There's so many good Pixar movies to choose from. And the fact that I think he's got two of the most important and most respected, I think it says something.
Yeah, I think Brad Bird's sensibilities are just so interesting to me because he's got that old school kind of like the very much the Tomorrowland style idea of that 1950s futuristic, and he brings that even into
Yeah.
something like The Incredibles, which is set in this weird, not real time period of it has those 1950s things with some modern technologies. And you see that definitely in the Iron Giant literally being set in the 50s. And I don't know if you watched the signature edition or you watched the original theatrical version, but the signature edition, they're the same length, so it's more of alternate scenes rather
I
than
think I just watched the theatrical
okay.
version.
The signature, so in the theatrical version, there's like a cereal commercial that plays on the TV because Brad Bird wanted to get the Tomorrow like rights to use Tomorrowland specifically, but Disney didn't give him the rights.
Is that when Dean is asleep and then wakes up to the prophecy of the Iron Giant like destroying the
Yeah,
world?
that's also an
Is that when
alternate
it
that's an
shows?
alternate thing in the movie as well, but in the signature edition you get to see the actual Iron Giant like army destroying something, like on another planet. But in the
So that's on both, or that's on just the
that's on or
theatrical? I'm
that's
confused.
there's some embellishment, there's some differences there with those scenes. Like I said, it's all very
Because I'm
minor.
gonna be honest, maybe because I haven't seen this movie in probably the better part of 20 years, I don't remember that scene at
Right.
all.
Right. It's yeah, that's there's a couple of things in there, but there's also earlier in the movie, I think, when the hand is crawling around, I think the house, you see a commercial on the TV and it's like a cereal commercial from the 50s.
Oh, probably. I probably
Yeah,
missed that when I
but
was
this
watching it.
but in the signature edition he does have the Tomorrowland commercial on there and it like zooms in on the TV and everything. It's all very minor
Oh, then I
cosmetic stuff, but just stuff that he originally
yeah.
wanted.
Yeah, so I think I watched the theatrical because I probably would have recognized something like
Right,
that.
right. And yeah, and I just love that kind of sensibility that he brings to his films and filmmaking because I think he also is one of the few examples of a animation director jumping into live action and doing a great job with it with Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. He did direct the movie Tomorrowland for Disney, which I think that one got kind of chewed up in the Disney machine because there are things I like that movie more than a lot of people do, but it's not great. And
I have seen neither of those movies, so I'm going to have to take
yeah,
your word
Mission
for it.
Impossible Ghost Protocol is maybe the most fun of that, and it really captures his sensibilities and his filmmaking style in a movie that is part of a bigger franchise, which is just kind of cool to see that translate to a live action setting like that. But Brad Bird is, despite his limited filmography, because he's an animation director and these movies take years and years to make, that he, despite his limited,
Or
yeah,
if you're Miyazaki, somehow just keep churning it out when you're 80
yeah,
years old.
yeah. I don't know how he does it, but
Well, he said he was going to retire after I think like
The Wind
something
Rises.
I thought not only that, I thought this might be wrong, but I thought he said he was going to retire after something like Princess Mononoke
Oh, I think
in
he
the
said he's
80s
gonna retire
or
like three
in the
times.
90s. Yeah, he's said basically his entire filming career that he's going
And
to
then just
retire.
never has. He won't retire.
He's the Michael Jordan
Yeah.
of
Well, now
animation.
his most recent movies, it's called How Do You Live or something like that. I think they retitled it in the US, but they're not releasing any trailers for it. Literally just a poster. It's already released in Japan. So it's like
Oh, it
yeah,
has?
but that's because it has no
Shoot.
marketing behind it, like just as an intentional thing. It's just a poster that's like a crane. So I don't understand. Like imagine having that kind of industry clout though, like you
Yeah.
can literally do whatever you want. Oh, I don't want to release a trailer, I just want a poster and that's it, and this movie's going to be a hit most likely. Yes. you know? But yeah, back to yeah, Brad Bird ends up kind of becoming one of my favorite filmmakers because he just has such a great sensibility, and this movie, something that he really understands in his films is just emotionality through the images, themselves, and he has a great sense of energy in them as well, and the way that they're put together and edited. And watching that behind the scenes thing, you really get to see what an animation director does, because it's really fascinating, because you don't have sets, you have actors, but only after most of it's already done, and you're just directing them to voice the characters. So it's not like
Right.
you're doing it on location. Everything is just created, and you're just trying to guide tons of artists through making a cohesive vision. And so it's just such like a monumental kind of task to even take that on, especially when this movie, so it has a $70 million budget, which might sound high because I don't think people fully understand.
Not for
Yeah,
animation, but definitely for the time I could see
well,
that being
but
high.
that for the time it
Definitely for a first feature
for a
film,
first
I
feature
could see that
film,
being high.
yes, but for the time in animation, for context, Tarzan cost $130 million to make in the same year. So
That's true,
it
but
had
that
half the budget. This movie had half the budget, and it only had
but Disney at that time was a known
right,
commodity, so it makes sense with that kind of
right.
budget.
So I mean, but animation costs a lot more than people think, because you have so many different animators who are all working on it and working on individual scenes, and you have to spread these resources out across many years, because a film project you can shoot over the course of a few months. An animated film you're making over the course of, if it's like a big studio animated film, like 5 years. In the case of this one, they had half the amount of time. They only had 2.5 years to make it, which is incredible that this movie's as good as it is with that. And I think it speaks to Brad Bird's like talent and focus as a director. But yeah, I think that in The Iron Giant, it's really interesting because, first of all, it doesn't try to be cutesy at all. It just comes across very like naturalistic. I feel like the thing that strikes me every time I watch this, and the thing that makes it feel fresh to me whenever I watch it, is that it all, the writing and then the performances too, just all feel very natural. And even though it's this animated thing, which is done down to a T because it has to be, it just all breathes so much life into this story.
Yeah, some of the voice actor for Hogarth for the first half was kind of pretty bland to me. Very mm, it is a child voice
Right.
actor, of course, so you have to take that into account. But the second half is the change is night and day. And I will note that I knew Jennifer Aniston was, and I forgot her first name, but
Yeah.
Hogarth's mother. And I am very surprised how she does
This is
voice
my
acting instead
favorite
of
Jennifer Aniston performance, which is like
yeah.
kind of an odd thing to say because it is just a vocal performance, but like I'm not a huge Friends fan, I didn't watch all of these.
And this was smack dab like in the middle
Right.
of the popularity of
Right. And
Friends, 5 years into it, and
yeah.
5 years before it
And I
ended.
didn't
So
really
yeah,
watch any of the rom-coms or things she did. I've seen some of the comedies, but she's usually playing up a kind of version of her Friends character. This one feels really different.
yeah, basically like We Are the Millers. She's
Right.
basically playing a typecast of what she would play.
Yeah. And so this one, it feels really different, and her voice like lends a lot to the character, and I think it was a really smart casting decision.
Annie
Same
is
thing
her
with
name.
Harry Connick Jr. as Dean, as like not it's
Yeah,
a little left
he
field, but it works really well.
don't take this the wrong way, but some of his scenes he just sounds like white Chris Rock to me. I don't know
I
why,
don't know what you
but
mean by that, but okay.
no, Chris Rock has a very
Yeah.
distinct voice. Like if you hear Chris Rock, he sounds a lot like Chris Rock
Okay.
to me. I don't know how.
That's interesting.
And Vin Diesel, he sounds exactly like Vin Diesel to me.
Vin
It's
Diesel
so
sounds
weird.
like Vin Diesel. Wow, that's crazy.
Yes, he does.
Actually, in this movie, he might sound the least like Vin Diesel.
Yeah, because there's so much like
Yeah.
a vocal
The
like
roboticization.
background sound. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Like, yeah, they do a good job of blending it.
They basically asked him to do
Right.
that, and then they changed it.
Right. It's interesting, in the behind the scenes, he's wearing those stupid little glasses he wears during the Fast and Furious movies. Like, he's just in the sound booth, but he's in those glasses. It's just funny.
Well, he had the same voice coach in Guardians of the Galaxy that I did here, so maybe he was still wearing the glasses for
Well, let's
for
hope
Guardians
so.
of the
I
Galaxy
hope
as
he
well.
always has those
Let's
glasses.
hope so. Where's the behind the scenes of Guardians of the Galaxy?
Yeah,
Show me
but
it.
the movie right at the beginning it sets up that it's actually set in the 50s, which I think, that influences a lot of kind of the approach and the storytelling for, the sake of the movie. I can't articulate what I'm saying, but
Well, it starts with those 50s
right.
sensibilities. So it starts in a 50s
Mhm.
style diner. Um and well, it doesn't start there. It starts after the fisherman has the encounter with the Iron Giant. It starts in the 50s style diner, and the fisherman is actually he's trying to communicate what he saw, and everyone just thinks he's a kook.
Right.
And so Dean, who's basically the neighborhood beatnik, uh, stands up for him because I mean that's kind of what the younger generation did.
Which I love that characterization
Was
for
like,
Dean. Like it just makes Dean immediately
yeah,
endearing. Just
yeah, he's definitely empathetic towards
the
that kind of
oddballs.
person. Probably, yeah, because especially I mean this is set in Maine, Maine in the 50s, kind of a
Right.
rural town. Yeah, I could imagine there's only a
No, he's
handful of
like if he
Deans
doesn't stand up for him,
around
who
there.
is? So
Yeah.
yeah, I just it really is a good introduction to the Dean character with that little moment, which once again goes into kind of the naturalistic feeling of the whole movie, where that's just kind of like a background conversation that's happening, and they're just kind of in a diner environment. It just all feels very naturalistic, despite being an animated film.
And it's definitely one of those small towns where everybody knows everybody.
Yeah,
There's probably like a
right,
thousand people
right.
who live in this town, max.
Yeah, and so this is where Bird's kind of sensibilities kind of come into for his very much 50s inspiration that he always infuses into his movies. And I like that they even have like the line that the old guy says. He goes, "It came from outer space," which is just such a 50s, just like you slap that
Yeah.
on your movie, like the thing from another world and stuff like that, which I love 50s sci-fi movies. And like I just watched the 1953 War of the Worlds movie, and this movie clearly takes a little bit from that too, with like the way that the arms are on the Iron Giant when he's like in the whole like attack form and
Yeah.
stuff like that. There's
It's
like,
a little bit like the day the earth stood still as well, which I
yeah,
believe is 51.
yeah, and there's like the scene where she's like, no scary movies, and he goes home and he's obviously watching a scary
Immediately
movie
scary movies,
immediately.
and like infusing his Twinkie with like more whipped cream, which man,
Yeah, it
that's
reminded,
certainly a way to get diabetes.
yeah, it's like the kind of movie like the woman without a brain, or I forgot what the movie's name is, but
I love the voice
the kind
acting
of,
from the
yeah.
man. He's like, "Oh darn, I left my keys."
I know. Even the attention to detail though in that
Hmm.
animation and how it's edited is so true to like 50 sensibilities. It's just like that's the attention to detail stuff that I think this movie just really nails.
No, and yeah, the way it's edited so that as he's running up the stairs to investigate the sound of the giant eating the antenna, it's still going on, and so it shows like, or the TV show says, or the movie says, like, what is that, along with like Hogarth and everything like
Right.
that. All the emotions are similar, and then the second that something happens on the TV, Hogarth's like, ah, screw the noise, I'm just gonna go watch the movie.
Yeah, which something that this movie does beautifully with in regards to its images with how they do the animation is I think in capturing kind of a filmic quality, they have very dynamic lighting there's a lot of
Yeah.
directional lighting in this movie with flashlights, with the TV, with the Iron Giant itself and electricity and stuff like that. There's just so much of that, and it's so well infused into the scenes and the emotionality of it. And that's a good example of that because you get the TV light shining on him and he's going through the dark house and all of that.
And it shows with the giant's eyes as well, because the only facial like movements that he can do are his jaw and his eyes, so he needs to make them as emotional as possible.
Yeah. So an interesting thing about the development of this movie is that apparently, so they had Brad Bird at Warner Brothers. He got fired from Disney for disagreeing with certain things that they were doing. And so then he ended up going over to Warner Brothers, and he was working on a project that then got scrapped, but they liked what he was doing with it even though it got scrapped. And so they tried to get him on to do this adaptation of the Iron Man, the book by, I don't remember the author's name, but
Ted Hughes.
Ted Hughes, which is, when did that come out? Like
63, I think. Definitely the
63?
60s.
Yeah,
It was after the death of his wife Sylvia Plath.
right. Which that book is dealing with grief a lot, but what they were
Yep.
making that as was an animated musical,
Oh no.
and that's what it was originally going to be. And then apparently Brad Bird came, and so this is where it ties right in.
I don't think Tap Dancing Giant would have come across
No,
on screen better than this.
and the test footage for it looks atrocious too. Like
Oh,
it
no.
looks even worse than you would think. It looks like straight to DVD garbage, like knockoff version of what this movie
Well,
ended
Disney
up being.
is known for that as well.
Yeah.
They're known for their good theatrical, but they are also really, really well known for their garbage that they just
Yeah.
put out straight to DVD. So would be on
And
brand.
yeah, I mean that was back in the Eisner days of Disney. I think it was Eisner. I don't remember, but
It was probably Eisner.
yeah. But that's what it was
Very Eisner
originally
thing
going to
to do.
be until Brad Bird got a hold of it. And so at this time in his life, the documentary goes into this where his sister was murdered by her spouse through gun violence. And after a long period of depression and everything, and then feeling a connection to that book, the Iron Man, and the kind of the
Yeah.
loss that that book kind of represents of somebody kind of pulling themselves back together, he took that and kind of infused that sensibility along with his other things that he likes to bring to his movies, and with like the 50s kind of aesthetic, and infuse that to make this version of the story more personal to himself, which I think works extremely well, because you do get that thematic through line that gets introduced in the scene with the deer, which is a beautiful scene. And apparently I think they were saying it's one of like the very first scenes that they really had to figure out. And that's once again a great example of the lighting, because you get the Iron Giant's hand coming out of the shadow to like look at this deer, which he's just curious about. And then you immediately get it going straight over to the deer runs off into the woods, and then you hear a gunshot, and then they go and find the deer, and it's just been shot. And the Iron Giant doesn't know how to process death. It's just poking the deer, just trying to see. And Hogarth is trying to explain to him that death, and then you get the great scene after that where he's like guns kill, and then which introduces that idea obviously, but then later you get him talking about guns kill, or killing is wrong, but death isn't, and kind of
Yeah.
the conversation of a soul, which is just so rich, like such like a great thing to have be kind of the emotional hook of this movie, because apparently Brad Bird's pitch was to make a movie about what if a gun had a soul. So I think that scene really kind of captures the core emotion of the movie. And like I said, the beauty and just the image, I get kind of emotional just seeing that image of the Iron Giant reaching out to touch the deer, because there's just such a warmth in what they're presenting and how they go about it. It's just really great.
Yeah. Only thing I can add to that is the callback at the end when Hogarth is trying to he's not even trying to stop him necessarily from being what he is. He's just telling him to choose. You don't have to be a gun. Guns kill. Killing isn't right. You don't have to be a gun. You can choose. Just choose.
Yeah.
Essentially is I'm paraphrasing, but yeah. But he's just trying to get through to him, because by then the giant goes full rogue. And I like the attention to detail that, of course, the dent on his head is likely what's stopping him
Right.
from his original programming. And the second that he thinks Hogarth is dead is when the dent goes back and his original programming takes over.
Right.
But everything that he's learned is not gone.
Right.
So
and
I like that.
yeah, and he acts out of self-defense in the movie from when he only starts to transform into the robotic terror whenever a gun's pointed at him.
Interesting thought about that. Obviously it's heavily supported, but it's just a theory, and it's my theory. Is that the giants get sent to a world, and it's not necessarily for like world destruction. It's just that every single time they get sent to a world with life on it, or at least intelligent life, the intelligent life always fights back, leading to the self-defense uh, that the giant shows. That's my theory, because I absolutely believe if something like that landed here, we would absolutely try to destroy it as our
Mm,
first method.
interesting. I do believe.
And and Kent Mansley, one of my favorite
Oh,
characters in
absolutely.
fiction, even does the entire like Batman versus Superman. If he even is a 1% hostile, we have to take that as an absolute certainty.
Right.
He essentially paraphrases that, which man, uh,
Yeah,
see
the Kent Mansley
see
character.
Zach, see Zach, Brad can do it a lot better than you.
Honestly, though, the Kent Mansley character is such a good just antagonist in this movie because I mean the real antagonist is kind of circumstance, but the Kent Mansley character just being so obnoxious, and this is like you get the scene where he knocks on their door originally, just shuts the door right in his face, and eventually him
Kent
moving in.
Mansley, I work for the government.
Yeah, eventually him moving into their spare room, which once again is so well set up just with details because you just see
Yep.
the sign in their window. They don't really address it, but then later she's like, "Somebody finally is renting our room," and it's him.
Yep.
And you just get the montage of him just like being keeping too close of an eye on him. He's calling him Slugger Chief.
Hey, how big is the giant cowboy?
Right, it just keeps going. Which yeah, that's Kent Mansley. He's just the worst. Which it's funny too because it's I forgot the actor's name.
Okay, so Christopher
Yes.
McDonald, I didn't look this up before I
Yeah.
watched it, but for some reason, after I watched this movie, I watched Happy Gilmore, and I have no idea
Oh,
why
really?
until I remembered. Wait a second, that's Shooter McGavin.
That's really funny. Yeah, he's just
Yeah.
good at playing this kind of character, and it works.
He's definitely typecast, but man,
Yeah.
is he good.
It
for
was smart casting for this kind of movie.
It is smart
because
casting.
apparently they wanted
And-
Arnold Schwarzenegger, the studio did, to play the Kent Mansley character, which is absurd.
How big is the robot cowboy?
It's an absurd. It doesn't work.
It doesn't hit as well.
No, that would have been a horrible choice. So I'm glad that the
Fire the missile now.
yeah.
Yeah,
They
it wouldn't
also
work.
apparently wanted John Travolta for the Dean character,
Oh no.
which I mean that one wouldn't have been as bad as Arnold Schwarzenegger as Kent,
Well,
but
Well, if this was a musical, maybe.
oh man, yeah. But this was after the change in direction, so now.
Tell me more. Like, did he eat my art?
Yeah, that's also so funny when Mansley's like dismissing the guy in the woods, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm here because big things happen in big places, and this is a small
He-
place." And then he gets in his car and he looks over and there's a bite.
There's a
out of it.
gigantic bite out
And then
of
he
it.
gets
yeah.
out of his car, turns around, runs to the other guy, and then you see the Iron Giant's hand just coming to grab the car. It's really funny. He turns around, it's gone.
Which Christopher McDonald absolutely plays the whole "oh my god" kind of like.
Right.
He plays that so well, and actually, oddly enough, small tangent and Happy Gilmore when he meets that giant, and he has to play it off Frankenstein's frickin' foot. Well, that's good for Happy Gilmore. Oh my god, it's so good. And I don't know why, but that reminds me of two good lines. So, Dean is buying the tractor off of some dude whose tractor had a gigantic bite out of
Yeah.
it, taken out of it, and he's like, there's a bite out of it, and he's like, yeah, that's why I'm selling it. There's a bite out of it.
He's like, I'm sorry I can't offer you more, but there's a giant bite
There's a
out of
bite.
it. He's like, that's why I'm selling it.
I'm selling it. There's a giant bite out of it. And the other one is I forgot who plays the general, but his line after the missile gets fired, he says, that missile is tied to the giant's current position.
That's the giant, Mansley!
That's the John
I love that
Mahoney is
delivery.
the general who is the
Ah,
dad
right.
in Frasier, which his voice is so great.
I love that delivery. Of
It
that
is
line.
like just all the voice work is just perfect in the movie. They just
If you can find a way to get that soundbite in there over my instead of my voice, absolutely do that. I love that delivery of that line.
it's great.
I had to go back and watch it like 5 times in a row. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, and this movie's not long. It's like it's under 90 minutes.
Yeah, hour
And
23 is
yeah,
what I thought it was, or around.
and I feel like it gives you everything you need from the story, and it doesn't feel like it's rushing it either.
Absolutely.
You just because you get obviously him going through the woods and at night, which is another great thing with the lighting, and finding him at the power plant, the scene that terrified me as a child, and he's like
Yeah,
eating the
saving him from the power station, then you get that's probably like the end of the first act, all the setup. Then
yeah
it's all the interactions with the giant, him learning
yeah
new words, him learning mannerisms, that
right.
kind
He
of thing.
brings him to Dean's, and this is the scene where like the railroad when he's like following him,
Yeah,
um, is
that's a great
also
scene.
it is a great scene, and it kind of plays off of like things don't necessarily always go exactly the way you think they might go in a movie like this, and it helps
No.
with the efficiency of the time frame for it being an animated movie, but not in an expected way, because you get him trying to fix the railroad and being really perfect and exact about it, and
And I love
but
how he would absolutely not know like what the importance of this
right
is, only that Hogarth is very angry that he messed it up. And so he's putting it back together, but he probably sees the train, but he doesn't compute whether the train's coming towards him and why the train is there. So
yeah
I do love that. Like the shot of him like lining it up, but you can see him
right
like facing the train and he's too
yeah, and
focused
I
on the
love
train
that it's
track.
like
Yeah.
definitely the guy's gonna see this giant robot, the guy driving the train, but also the fact that he hits him too
Yeah.
is just kind of this nice like version of the scene, because it's you're kind of you're tense like, oh no, he's gonna do it in time, he's gonna get seen, all this stuff, and it's like, yes, all of the stuff that could have gone wrong in that scene go wrong, and I love that that is allowed to happen. And it also gives you where the Iron Giant falls apart and kind of reintroduces, or it kind of introduces the element of him
I
putting himself
hadn't I hadn't seen it in a while. I thought the train like I get that the train like gets hit and I think the dude gets
yeah,
like
he's
a
a
concussion
bandage
or
around
something
his
like
head.
that. Next time we see him, he's got a bandage on his head. Yeah. But I could have swore that the train derailed when I was a kid. Like it only makes sense that the train would derail after hitting like a gigantic
Right.
metal thing,
I
but I
think,
guess
doesn't
not.
it? I don't remember. I'm trying to think back. But
I don't think it does. I think it just stops.
well, either way, like it definitely
Um
wrecks,
I could yeah.
whether or not it actually falls off the track.
It
I don't
definitely
remember.
stops.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, so then yeah, we get all those scenes that just kind of builds up, which this movie has a very strong ET influence. I would say I would even go so far to say that there were a lot of ET clones that kind of came out after ET, because at the time ET became the biggest movie ever for a good stretch of time. Probably I think till Titanic, maybe Jurassic Park. But so you get these kind of ET style movies, and this one I think is the only one of those that I can think of that truly stands up on its own still. Because, you had like Harry and the Hendersons. And even like a few years ago, you had like a found footage movie called Earth to Echo. And it's like these just straight up ET ripoffs. And this one definitely has those same kind of elements, but it takes it, and I think it just has such a unique quality to it that it really ends up creating its own version of this kind of story. And so, but you like in ET, you get these scenes at this point where he's learning to, he has to hide the robot in the house, which is really funny because that's where Kent Mansley shows up for the first time, and the hand is just like
Yep.
loose in the house, crawling around, and he's trying to hide it. And you get the funny bathroom scene where
Yep.
he's like,
He's already pushing
right.
up, but he has to
I
pretend to
just
be like using
I
the
love that he's
bathroom.
pretending to use the bathroom, and then when he knows the door's gonna be open, he unzips his pants and sits on the toilet as if he's using the bathroom
Yeah.
just quickly to sell it. He's like, I don't care if I'm embarrassed right now.
Man, that's some method
I
acting.
know. It's like the embarrassment doesn't matter because I can sell my lie better if I do this. So, and
What I find funny is everyone reacts to the toilet flushing before Hogarth is
right.
there, and neither. Well, Kent obviously puts the pieces together eventually, but not then. But I like how his mother's just like, "Yep, yeah, okay, toilet flushing, whatever."
It's just I feel like it's very chaotic, that whole scene is. So yeah, and
I mean, if Shooter McGavin was in my living room,
yeah.
absolutely everything would go to shit.
So yeah, then he has to find him a home, so he gets him to the scrap heap at Dean's, because Dean's an artist who also runs a scrap heap and makes art out of the scrap metal. And since the Iron Giant,
Absolutely the most successful beatnik in the
oh
50s,
for
I
sure, look
swear.
at that scrapyard, it's huge, it's in the middle of the woods too. But
Yeah, he can afford to have a buffet for a giant and just be like, you know what? Just don't eat the art. I
right.
don't care.
And that's, you get a lot of just really good warmth and heart in these scenes of him being with the giant, and they're not that many. It's not, once again, the movie's not very long, but it really conveys the emotion of everything and the connection between them like really well in such a short period of time. And I mean, I love the scene where they go swimming too, and it's when the Iron Giant goes for the cannonball and Dean's reading the newspaper.
Dean just puts the newspaper back up as
It's
if
a
that's a force
perfect
field.
cut right there, because you get like the wide shot of like the water spouting up in the air and then the wave starting to come up, and then it cuts right to Dean with his newspaper in front of his face, and there's just a wave like 3 times taller than him about to like wash him out.
Yeah,
And then another
absolutely a
great
tidal wave.
line delivery of like he gets washed out into the road.
Hey, buddy. Yeah, you're in the
Yeah?
road. Yeah.
He goes, okay. Just drives on. It's
All
just
right.
funny. Yeah. And so yeah, you get a really good connection between these characters, and then once you introduce the gun subplot, then you start to get the conflict with the robot, with the Iron Giant. You know, his eyes turn red and he gets activated kind of by that. And then you obviously have Hogarth pretending to shoot the giant. And then, and all in the meantime, you get the military around because Kent Mansley called the military and all that, which, yeah. And
Yep.
so it's just, and it has this great, back to like the 50s kind of sensibility where it has an authenticity there with like in the classroom scene where they're watching the duck and cover video, which
I'm gonna be honest, that type of stuff in the 50s did get a bad rep, or at least nowadays, because it's like duck and cover, is that really the best you can do in a nuclear blast? And yes, it is. You don't want to be anywhere near a window because when the shockwave hits, you want to be on the ground, preferably facing away, and also nowhere near any kind of glass. So that's all you can do.
yeah.
So I totally get that type of instructional video. It is definitely hilariously dramatized, especially back then as it is now. But yeah, I can see why you would put out something like
Well,
that.
and I can see why at the time too, like even if they knew that most people are still not going to survive that, you know, if anybody.
Yeah.
But I can see at the time there's so little knowledge still about what was going to happen with all of that. There were 2 examples of it that happened in history on the other side of the planet. So
Yeah, there are 2 examples where it was used to kill as many people
Right.
as possible. So and there's only so much data you can get out of that, especially because it was not on a place
Yeah.
where you could measure exactly what was happening. Obviously, we knew about radiation and fallout and that kind of thing, which I like. Going just to the nuclear blast that does happen in the movie, I like how it's pretty realistic when it comes to nuclear blasts. Obviously, there's no mushroom cloud because it takes place like on the edge of space,
Right.
and also most of that energy is going to be dissipated depending on how close everyone is to the ground zero. There's, well, metaphorical ground zero, but there's not going to be much radiation that goes down to the ground, and there will be no fallout whatsoever because there's no dirt being kicked up.
Yeah.
So obviously there's not much to worry about depending on how far away they are from the blast.
Yeah, and at the same time, there's also just the communist kind of scare factor of this too, where Kent's kind of like,
Which was absolutely a thing, especially in the 50s.
and then Kent's like, I don't care where it's from. It could be from Russia or Canada.
It could be from Russia, China, Canada, Mars. I
As
don't
long as
care.
it's not here.
It's not from
Yeah.
us. It's not from us.
Right. That whole
I also like the even now Sputnik is flying overhead. Boop, boop.
he's like the first
yeah.
satellite in space, the first foreign satellite in space.
Satellite in space. That was a huge thing back then because of course we had the nuclear bomb way before them. We had the first hydrogen bomb before them, even at this time.
Right.
But they were winning the space race at the time with Sputnik, and that was a huge like patriotic point
Yeah.
for the U.S. citizens. It's like, wow, we're losing this now.
Yeah.
How did things get so
You
wrong?
probably haven't watched it because I know you don't have a lot of like streaming services, but the Apple show For All Mankind is a wonderful, wonderful show. And it's kind of this alternate history of what if the Russians landed on the moon first. And
Yeah.
it just kind of, and then everything kind of evolves from that with how the space race continued longer than it would have because, like the US's desire to keep pushing, didn't like go out because of the competition and stuff like that, and just kind of reshaping history. And as the show goes on, it gets farther and farther away from our own history and to become its own history. And
Oh, that's
it's
cool.
a really good show. It's really, really well thought out. And I think that you'd find it really interesting because it goes into the politics. It's all about the space race. It's like NASA, and you start getting private companies getting involved in their own space travels. And
like SpaceX
yeah,
and
like that
Virgin.
kind of stuff, but like way earlier in history because of the way that things played
Yeah.
out. I think that you'd really like that show. I think it's a really interesting take on that.
Something I'll plug as well, Public Service Broadcasting, which is a band that mostly deals with real time events, has an album on the space race, and they have their own melodies and beats to go along with essentially what is like the actual recordings from like the Apollo program. And it starts with JFK's Rice University speech, the one we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things not because they are easier but because they are hard. It starts off with that and then just goes down the list of the things that happened. Starts with Sputnik, Yuri Gagarin, and that kind of thing goes down like the Apollo 1 failure and all the Apollo missions that made it to the moon, which super cool.
Yeah, no,
Or not all the Apollo missions, but like it hits the highlights. And it's a pretty small album, but it's very cool to see like music surrounding actual events using the actual events as the quote unquote lyrics.
Yeah.
So that's something I'll say.
I mean,
about
I
that.
love that kind of stuff. Like it goes into kind of
It's also just good album.
I love Star Trek. I love all of these kind of things that evolved around the space race era in the, the late 50s to the 60s and 70s. That whole kind of era is always been fascinating to me, and so I will eat up anything that comes out kind of dealing with that for sure.
Yep, definitely give that a listen. I'll check out For All Mankind.
Yeah, it's a great show. I love it. Yeah, and and kind of going into that, like you get some of these shots and images that really kind of hone back to that kind of era too, not just in the aesthetics and kind of like stuff like that, but like literally you get like the shot.
I could give an example as well.
You get
but
the
go
shot
ahead.
where like the Iron Giant learns to fly towards the end of the movie, like when they're on the cliffside and he just launches up, and you get the shot of him looking like a rocket going straight up, and you have the mom and her car at the edge of a cliff, looking at that,
Yeah.
and her dress is flowing by, and as the rocket goes past. And that's just one of those perfect, just like that image alone, it gets me emotional. Like it is an emotionally charged image, which is something that Bird really understands with how to craft these sequences and stuff to get the most emotional richness out of limited time and material.
Yeah, before there was How to Train Your Dragon, it was How to Train Your Giant.
Ugh, I'm not a fan of those movies. Which
Really?
yeah, I don't.
I'm
care
actually
for 'em.
very surprised by that. I've only seen the first one, but I would have thought you would enjoy them.
Yeah, I would have thought so too, but from the first one, I didn't like it as much as everybody else did. I think it's fine, and then everyone since then I've liked less and less, and I've seen all of them. So
The example I was going to give is so Hogarth is he's got his helmet, he's got his BB gun, he attached the flashlight, he runs out the door to go see what's up, and it focuses on the comic The Red Menace. So
right,
and I think that's purposeful. It's like an unknown enemy
Yeah.
type thing.
yeah, you get a lot of like comic book references in this. There's obviously a very significant one
Superman.
with the Superman comic, and he has this like Atomo giant robot comic.
Which I like how he tells the giant not to be a Tomo and then immediately role plays as a
Which
a
is
Tomo.
it's such a kid thing to do.
It is
the kid,
absolutely a kid.
the
thing
kid wants
do.
to be the hero, the kid wants to win, and so he tells the robot to be a Tomo so that when they're playing their game. But
Nah, you need to be more like Superman. Okay, now be a Tomo.
Well, the Iron Giant's like, no, Atomo. And he picks
Me,
up a giant
Superman,
S
yeah.
and goes, me, Superman. Which is like, it makes usually these kind of like almost shameless plugs, because Warner Brothers obviously owns the rights to Superman and stuff, would be a little bit of an eye roll for me, but the movie uses it to such emotional effect.
I'd
And
like
it
to
makes
think that
sense.
they have all the voice actor. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and it makes sense for the time period too, with Superman being, these kind of graphic novels, the comic books being what they are. It really makes sense for the time period to incorporate that into your story with the character focused around, or with the movie focused around such a young character.
It was also during those days very fantastical when it came to comic book heroes, like seeing every week like the new powers or new fights that they would get into, especially because the only thing they had back in those days, they didn't have the internet, obviously, so
Right.
all they had was what they saw on television and what they could read in comic books. So, but I like to think that Vin Diesel and the voice actor for Hogarth are just like sitting there in the table read, and Vin Diesel just looks at him and go, "No, Atomo, I'm Superman."
Yeah, it's just, and then the way that they bring that to the end of the movie, and
Yep.
also the "You are who you choose to be," which is first introduced by Dean to him, when he's got the scene where he shows up at Dean's place, he's drinking coffee, and Dean's trying to tell him, get that message across to him, and then he is able to then in turn give that message to the Iron Giant at the end of the movie, when the Iron Giant's effectively about to blow up a town with the military and all of that going on because they're shooting
something
at him.
something about the military I noted, which I appreciate, is back in those days, especially, um, the military was seen as very efficient, even though in reality it was efficient with the technology it had compared to the rest of the world. However, it was pretty inept at times. So I could bring examples of. I assume you know what Broken Arrow means.
No, I know that the movie Broken Arrow exists.
Yes, and you obviously know what that implies, but Broken Arrow in military terms, especially surrounding nuclear weapons, is quote unquote an incident surrounding a nuclear weapon.
Okay.
There's been a couple dozen. In fact, that includes the time where I believe it was a B-52, accidentally nuked North Carolina. Obviously, the detonators didn't go off, so it didn't actually detonate. And but I think something like 3 out of 4 detonators did trigger. So we were one step from like having an insane amount of fallout
Oy.
cover the entirety of the East Coast, especially since the wind goes northeast. So it would have covered all the way from probably Washington D.C. to Boston. But yeah, there's been a couple dozen of those, including um, a few accidental bombings of like obviously New Mexico, not necessarily Los Alamos, but yeah, New Mexico. But fun fact, we don't know how many times that there have been nuclear incidents in the USSR. So sleep well tonight.
Yay.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because it did show in obviously the military is trying its best against the Iron Giant, and it's doing so for reasons that they don't understand, but are understandable given the circumstances of the things that they know and the things that they don't. But I appreciate how inept it seems, especially when Mansley gets the entirety of like a what seems like a platoon to go over to a scrapyard,
Right.
and and it's a folly.
Well,
But
and then the general yells at him in that scene. You know how
yep.
many? I think he says millions of
Do you
dollars
know
spent
do you
trying to
know
get
how
us all
many
out
of
here.
Uncle Sam's dollars you
Yeah.
just used?
It's like,
Yep.
yeah, it kind of highlights exactly what you're saying with like efficiency yet ineptitude at the same time.
Yeah.
As they got them all out there really fast. They just, you know.
Oh yeah, and I was surprised they mobilized multiple battleships to go to the coast of Maine
I mean,
for
but
art.
I get it in the context of a movie like this.
Oh yeah.
And then
Yeah.
also, yeah, just kind of the with the, the
And a
elevated,
nuclear capable
right,
submarine.
just the atomic
uh,
fears and the
yeah.
communist fears all kind of escalating to like this hyper paranoia. It makes sense for this era.
Yeah, hyper paranoia really that that basically describes the entirety from the late 40s to
Right.
the 80s.
Yeah. So yeah, so you get the scene and he's telling him, you know, he's trying to calm him down at the end of the movie because they've already launched the rocket because Kent Mansley is the worst, and he like takes the radio even after the general realized that,
Yeah.
which I love that the general realizes that it's acting in self-defense, and once he knows the kid's not actually dead and Mansley lied to him, he's
Before
going to call off
before
the
everyone
attack.
as well, because the only thing that he knows is there's a robot. It's not ours, and it's killed a kid. That's the thing
Right.
that Kent Mansley has said. So once he figures out that Kent lied to him, obviously that turns everything on its head. What else don't I know? So
Right.
yeah.
So, but the missile's already been fired because Kent Mansley took the radio over and yelled at them to fire, so they did.
Where's the giant, Mansley?
It's like, shouldn't we duck and
I love
cover?
that delivery.
It's like, that doesn't work.
Yeah, especially at ground zero, and I
Right.
have no idea if it's just an atomic bomb like a fission bomb, or if it's a thermonuclear fusion bomb. But
doesn't go into it.
You're probably screwed either
Either way.
Given how close you are to the robot, meters away. Yes, you are very dead.
And he's like, you're going to die today for your
Like a
country.
good soldier.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he goes, screw my country. I want to live.
I want to live. Then he gets stopped immediately.
By the Iron
Love that.
Giant, and the Iron Giant puts his arms on his hips like a Superman pose, like
Yep.
But and then you get the whole, he repeats the line very ET of it once again to do the whole,
You stay, I go.
yeah, you
no
stay, I
following.
go, no
Yep.
following, very much like the come stay moment of ET. And yeah, then he takes off and he blows up and sacrifices himself to save the day. And it's sad until you realize at the end that his pieces are all pulling themselves back together in the Arctic somewhere. So, which I like that it gives like a specific location, even though I don't think it had to. But
I mean, Iceland.
Yeah.
Yeah, he would have had to fly far if he made it all the way across.
I mean,
the
he was
Pacific to
like-
Iceland.
like you said, he was on the edge of space, so who knows how far that can
Yeah.
get blasted. But
Man, but Iceland.
yeah, I was like, okay.
I believe Greenland, but wow, Iceland. Wow.
Either way,
Maybe Brad Bird fell for it as well and thought Greenland was Iceland
Who's
and
to
Iceland was
say?
Greenland.
say maybe they didn't know that much in 1999.
Man,
But yeah, no, this is so. I mean, this is one of my favorite animated movies, and by saying that, I am also saying that this is just one of my favorite movies. I love it, and I don't have like a long lasting nostalgia for it. It is something that I developed as an adult. It's just a really wonderful and I think a really special movie that just kind of really, it captures a nostalgic feeling, and but it more so it captures using good filmic techniques, you know, in lighting and in their compositions, just kind of really getting the emotion of what it needed to get across. And I think that I wish that this movie made money in its original release, but I would not doubt it if it has in time over.
oh, trust me, no, you don't, because I know exactly what happens after that. The second it makes a ton of money, it's gonna have a sequel, and I promise you that the sequel isn't gonna be as good as the
Yeah,
first.
like what I was thinking, like what they,
Part of me loves the fact that it didn't make money because of the fact that we didn't get a franchise off of it.
yeah,
Which they were leaning into at the time. Obviously, it wasn't a thing like the MCU nowadays, but they would have made a sequel out of it, and I probably wouldn't have enjoyed
yeah.
it.
Do you have anything else to say about the main movie before we get into scoring?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, I'm sure we'll talk more about that stuff when it comes to impact. But so
We'll definitely talk about more things when it comes to scoring anyway.
yeah,
So let's
let's dive right into scoring.
trudge along.
So the
Yep.
way we do our scoring on this show is the same as we have been doing it. We do points from 0 to 2, 0 being not good, 1 being good, and 2 being great. We keep it pretty simple, and we do that across 10 categories for a total of, you know, X out of 20 is going to be the final score for the show. This score is the show's score. We like to analyze just different aspects of films, and so it doesn't necessarily fully reflect our own thoughts unless it happens to, but it is based on our opinions. So,
And even when it happens to, it's just a
right.
coincidence. Because we wouldn't use these metrics in our regular day to
Yeah,
day.
because I really base movies mostly on feel. Like, how it impacts me
And I base them mostly on writing.
So speaking of writing, the writing for this movie, that's our first category, is writing.
Yep.
I think that this is a wonderfully written film. Like I said, it feels so naturalistic. Everything just comes across like a real living thing, despite the fact that, like I said, it's animation. And this kind of marked a weird pivot in animation, the time period that this came out in, to that more naturalistic kind of feeling from the more cartoony. And I think that this is maybe the best example of it from the time period. So I would have to give writing it too.
So, because this is a children's movie, and I can tell, I personally would give this a 1. However, I do recognize the fact that I granted a curve on Pitch Black when it came to actors being little known and that kind of thing, what you could get out of it. When it comes to children's movies, obviously they aren't going to be as complex or as meaningful when it comes to storylines necessarily. And more so the opposite. Not because it's a children's movie, that does not mean it is automatically less complex or less meaningful than a movie written for adults. But I would still say that some of the dialogue really doesn't hit as well because it's a children's movie, and they kind of had to put it in there because it's of what it is. But that being said, I will still give it a
I
2.
don't know. I just think it gets its themes across extremely well in a way that, like, it's stuff that you know, but it says things in a way that makes me feel like I just needed to hear it. You know, the way that this movie kind
Right.
of puts it out there. And I know you're saying it's a kid's movie, but I do think that this movie has a specific feeling of not
I'm
really caring that much about children's sensibilities.
What I'm not saying is that as an adult you can't
Right.
enjoy it or appreciate it. I'm saying a lot of the dialogue was written with children in mind, and I think that does hurt a little bit of the dialogue when it comes
I would
to
also say,
story.
though, that a lot of the dialogue is not written with children in mind, especially compared to other animated movies at the time.
Well, both can be
Yeah,
true.
I'm not saying that both can't be true for sure. But, like, you know, you get some mild language in here. You get a few hells, you get a damn it, even. And, you know, you have those kind of things in there to, you know, give it a little bit of. I feel like it gives it a little bit of more authenticity to the sound of it. I think that it's actually kind of interesting because we went through a long period of time where movies kind of completely went away from language, like animated films. But now with both Spider-Verse movies and the new TMNT, you get a little bit of that back in there again. Just very mild language. And it's kind of
I'm not talking about language per se.
Right.
I'm talking about when it comes to exposition or when it comes to dialogue writing. as
right.
a
I didn't
whole,
mean to
not
like highlight
necessarily.
and focus in on the language, but I do want to say that
Watch your profanity.
I just want to say that for the sake of like I think that in the writing there's not as much of a specific effort to be sensitive to children's ears. You know, I hear what you're saying, but I do kind of differ.
What I will say as a kid, I very much felt for Hogarth and wanting to be a bit of a rebel when it came to that type of stuff. But no, absolutely, I cannot stand Hogarth because I believe that Annie is in the right always, because she is just a hardworking server at a diner, just coming home after long hours, just trying to find out that her son is safe, and he's out playing with something that is way too dangerous for him. Absolutely not. Annie is right. Hogarth is a bit of a spoiled brat, in my opinion. Now, obviously, that's all sarcasm,
Right.
but
I got
it's
yeah.
it's a bit like when you grow up but you watch Tom and Jerry when you were a kid. You were like, man, Jerry's the coolest. Jerry's in the right. But then you grow up and it's like, Jerry's an
He is.
asshole. God.
Yeah, I mean, so is Bugs Bunny
No, but
and so many cartoon characters from that time. But like,
oh
I
yeah,
feel like so I run into this kind of with some.
Elmer Fudd's just trying to feed his family, yo.
I run into this sometimes with animated films, especially actually Japanese films that have children in it, because like Miyazaki films and
Man, some of those movies are not
Well,
children's
and
movies,
Mamoru
though.
Hosoda, I think,
But they are important for anyone to watch. Like was it Graveyard of the Fireflies or Grave of the Fireflies? Is something everyone should
yeah,
watch.
and well, there's also the director Mamoru Hosoda. He directed this movie Mirai, which is I think, a wonderful little movie, but I think that the presentation of the children is so realistic and so accurate that there are times where I'm like, I hate this kid, you know, because the kid
Yeah.
is like an actual kid and he's whiny and stuff. And I feel that a little bit with Hogarth, especially at the beginning of the movie, because of the way that he is. But I also feel like that I don't dock it for that because I feel like it's managing to accurately represent children.
Well, I'm not docking it for that. I'm docking it for like specific
Yeah, I
dialogue
see what
that
you're
I
saying.
don't remember the exact
Yeah.
thing of, but yeah. I'm still not giving it a 1 because, like I said, I have to be consistent when it comes to the scoring. I gave a curve on something else, so I kind of have to give it a
Okay,
curve on
so
this as
we'll
well.
put that as 2 then.
Yeah,
All
keep it at 2.
right. World building is our next category.
Yes, it
I
is.
think you go
And
first.
this definitely feels like it's a 50s
Right.
movie, through and through. It sets the stage for the the Red Scare, the the fear of communism, the unknown fear of sci-fi characters, especially given the nuclear age. We have no idea what radiation has its effects on wildlife or space or what this means for other species, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. Also, it's just a fear of domestic problems. Obviously, when it comes to the Red Scare, it's not even communist. They kind of pointed fingers at everybody, anybody who dissented, anybody who was different. So, and I definitely get that here. And there's a lot of paranoia and a lot of finger pointing, and I see that here. I see a military that absolutely feels like it could be in the 50s, and the kind of the home aspect, the mother son thing, as well as the diner and the town itself feels very 50s, feels very lived in, feels like it's been
Yeah.
there for a while. So,
It has a real
yep,
attention to detail.
I
Yeah,
feel it's a
real.
2. It
And
really
like, and
is.
going into even more, like you got like the TV commercials and the old movie and the comic books and all of that stuff. It all just feels very authentic, very detail
Hmm.
oriented. Yeah, definitely too. All right, characters is our next section.
Yep.
Characters for me, it's another 2 for me personally. I think that I know you brush up against the Hogarth character, but like I said, he feels very authentic to me, and I like his
Well,
growth.
Hogarth in the first half is a bit weird to me. Hogarth in the second half completely
Yeah,
redeemed
I think
himself.
that he grows a lot in the movie, and that they give him a good
He
arc.
does.
The Iron Giant himself is this great childlike behemoth that can kill everybody, and he's
Yep. Not unlike Vin Diesel.
but then also I think that his mother is really well fleshed out. Kent Mansley is a fantastic, just one of my favorite.
Kent
Yeah, one of
Mansley.
my favorite
Oh,
antagonists. I
that
even love the
man.
general. The Dean character is great. I love just kind of the other townspeople.
The Dean character's got some really, really
Yeah,
good lines.
he's just like, all of the characters are just well thought out, and they're well, presented within the context of the film. I think the characters is a 2.
My only hangup, and it's not worth not putting a 2 on it. I know double negative, but um, the the whole like ending scene where Hogarth is wrestling with the rest of his classmates. It's kind of weird that it just goes straight from like apparently he's getting bullied to apparently he's cool now because he's friends with a robot. But and I guess obviously it doesn't help the story by like going over that even more. But I thought it was just real weird to include that at the end.
Though
So
the ending of the movie is a little bit clean, which is, that's where it feels like
yeah,
it's a little bit targeted, allowing for a younger demographic to appreciate it.
yeah,
But and so I get what you're saying. I do think though, like for kids at that age, if one kid is friends with a giant robot and helped saved the entire town, including all of your lives, that they would be your friends all of a sudden. you know? It's not like
yeah.
when you're an adult and you're like, well, that guy may have saved us all, but he's still a jerk. When you're a kid, you're like, oh,
I
he's
don't
cool.
know.
He's a robot
I don't
friend.
know. I don't know. Kids can absolutely find ways to pick on somebody for anything.
Yeah.
So, still a 2 though.
Yeah.
It's just kind of weird that it feels like they left out a few things when it came to like Hogarth and his new friends, I'd guess. I don't know. It
Yeah.
just feels very out of place.
It's just that it's a little bit of a bow tying wrap up for sure, both with that
Yep.
and the scene of the Iron Giant reassembling.
Yeah.
So
I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah, I still like it and I appreciate it. And like Hannah loves the movie E.T. So do I. I am a huge fan of E.T. And but she describes E.T. as a sad movie because the way that that movie ends with them leaving and presumably never really seeing each other again is like devastating to her, and she cries just thinking about it. And I get that. It's really like it is sad. It's heart-wrenching at the end. And this movie kind of avoids that by having that cleaner wrap up. So for that sake, I don't mind that it ends that way, although I wouldn't have minded it if it decided to end in a sadder way either. But that's kind of beside the point. Directing is the next category, which this is Brad Bird's first film that he directed. He had done some animation shorts and stuff that were pretty well respected, but not very seen. And he was kind of treated as the golden boy rising up the ranks in Disney, but then obviously got fired from Disney. Apparently in the documentary he actually says that when he was leaving, he was like the final office visit when he was
I'll be
fired.
back and in greater numbers.
No, he said this was, and he said he paused because he couldn't think of exactly how to describe it because he's like, it wasn't fun. So he wasn't going to say this is fun, so he paused. And apparently one of the execs,
This is Ben.
well, apparently one of the execs filled it in. He said a disappointment, and then Brad Bird
Oh.
looked back at him and he said, yes, a disappointment, and then left. So that's kind of the golden boy status that he was in before leaving Disney. And so I really think that Brad Bird is one of my favorite directors, and I get excited for everything that he does. He has a few upcoming projects, and I think that he started off, if as a not like as a first feature, I think he managed to make one of the all-time great animated films. And I'm like, it's just astounding to me. And the fact that I've seen his sensibilities continue to be as strong as this, I don't even think he's necessarily gotten better. I think that he's just, you know, continued to be as good as he was at the start, which is kind of amazing to me.
I'll say this: I've seen 4 movies from him. Obviously, this movie, The Incredibles, Ratatouille, and The Incredibles 2. I can't speak many good things about Incredibles 2. I'm gonna be honest.
I really like The
So
Incredibles too. It's not as good as the first one in pretty much any capacity, but I mean, just from I do still think it's really good, specifically after it gets into. I think the first 30 minutes kind of drags, but once it gets into Elastigirl going on her missions,
I think the last 30 minutes
oh
is
really?
worse.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, his direction and his sense of pacing and his understanding of this kind of graphic style, especially in the whole once
I'm also purely coming at this from writing.
yeah when Elastigirl
So I
goes
think
on
the
her
writing is very
first
poor.
mission and everything, I think that Incredibles 2 kind of takes off, and I end up really enjoying that movie, even though I don't think it's as good as the first one in any way. But I do still think that Bird's direction is great, and it's interesting going back to this one every time after seeing all of his progression and just seeing that he just started off so strong. So for that, I have to give it a 2.
Yeah, I will agree with every point made for
Yeah.
this.
We talked about the acting a lot with the different characters in the movie. I think that it's extremely well cast and everybody plays their part perfectly. I don't s- I don't know if there's much more to talk about with the acting. I think it's great.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think it would
I
be
think
a solid
we've
2
been over
right there
the-
too.
Yeah.
All right. Visuals. So
So if you want to come at this from not the animation point
yeah,
of view,
because we have
how would
animation
you-
and visuals as separate categories here. Animation being our alternate category that switches out each movie depending on the movie. And animation will probably be the category given any animated movie that we talk about. For the sake of this, to distinguish the visuals from the animation, the visuals is just kind of okay. I'll use a couple of examples.
Okay.
So there's this movie that came out recently on Netflix called Nimona, and a lot of people were really loving it, so I watched it, and I didn't love it. I think that you could tell its budget a lot, and I think visually the movie it looks pretty empty, and it's not as involving as I would have liked, but the animation itself is really good. like the actual character motions, the actual character animations, everything, all of the action is really well animated, but the movie doesn't look that great, I don't think. I think it has a style that is a little bit limited. Alternatively, you have something like the Mario Bros movie, which came out earlier this year. Obviously, huge hit. And I think that visually, that movie looks beautiful. They really captured that kind of Mario sensibility. Illumination has all the resources in the world. They're one of the biggest animation studios, despite everything that I think about their films that they make. That being said, the animation itself in that movie is just, it's not very impressive to me. I think the movie's animation is just kind of boring, and despite it has all of the visuals and the clear budgetary power behind it and the way it looks, but the animation isn't that special in that movie. It looks very kind of cookie cutter. So that's kind of where I would separate those things, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does not, but not to me at least. I have no idea how to distinguish those two by how you described.
Well, in this case, the visuals, they have great visual representation. I love, like I said, the way that they use lighting in this movie is really first rate. And they also,
So would you count that as visuals or animation? Lighting specifically.
I mean,
That's what I'm trying to
yeah,
get at.
I mean, we might have to rethink this with how we talk about this.
Even if you wanted to do period piece, that would make sense, but that's more so world building. If you wanted to do, there's some comedic aspects, but I wouldn't call this exactly a comedy. Um,
I mean, okay, the visuals within the movie, though, like the actual
you could go with children's movie instead, if you wanted
ah,
to.
nah, children's movie, because I don't want to. I'm not. I don't.
Nah.
I feel so strongly about animation. I would not want to diminish it to that, and I wouldn't even classify this as a children's movie.
We're not describing every single animated movie as a children's
Right.
movie.
I don't think that I would describe this one as a children's movie, though.
Interesting.
You know, like I think that this movie is appropriate for children, but I think that it's pretty universal in its appeal.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I feel like I have an understanding of the difference between the
It's an-
visuals and
it's
the
an action
animation.
movie.
But if you're not having as much of a distinguishing,
So would visuals be like shot composition kind of thing?
yeah,
If we're
yeah, like
talking,
shot
like
compositions,
not necessarily
yes,
animation as in like the actual physical animation of like the robot and the characters.
yes. I'm gonna distinguish it that way. Like,
How about we do character animation and visuals? So if you were to take a shot from this movie, that's how we distinguish visuals, and then like when it comes to animation, it's the actual animation going into
I see what you're saying.
like the characters and the action.
Yeah,
kind of
I
thing.
think that the
That would be the only way that I could
visuals are also
understand
going to be the
actually
more
splitting them up.
aesthetic qualities, I would say, of the animation. You know, whereas
I'm just seeing big bold italicized
well,
aesthetic.
like, but you know what I'm saying though? It's the
Yes, I know
yeah,
what
the
you're saying.
aesthetic qualities of the movie versus the actual animation is kind of where I'm
Right.
distinguishing it. So that's where it's like Mario
Okay.
Brothers looks pretty, but the actual animation in the movie is boring and isn't that exciting to watch.
Okay. I haven't seen that movie, but I've seen the trailers, so I kind of get what you're saying when it comes to
Yeah.
that.
And I know you
Um,
haven't seen Nimona, and the visuals in that movie are pretty flat and kind of bland to me, but the
I'm
animation
hurt.
is
You
good.
assume that I haven't seen a new movie. I haven't seen
It's a Netflix original animated movie. You've not watched it.
Absolutely, I have not seen it.
But yeah, so in this case, either way, getting into the visuals of this movie, I think that they really understand lighting. They really understand the period with like the way that they bring about all of these different aesthetics, and just kind of there's a visual quality to it that kind of harkens back to a different age. And the way that they made this movie look really works well with that. They also do a thing which this is more actually
Yes, they
well,
do a
actually
thing.
that's more of an animation thing, so I'll save that. But
So, when it comes to visuals, and if we were talking about the Spider-Verse movies, I would distinguish visuals and animation as the the framing on twos and framing on ones that they use in order to
Yeah,
distinguish like the swinging animation kind of thing. And when it comes to visuals, if you were to pause the movie, every single frame in that movie could be like a
yes.
wallpaper. So that's how I would
That's a movie
distinguish
that's
it.
a
Like
2 in
how,
both categories for me.
yeah, absolutely, both of those
And
movies.
I think that applies to this one for me as well. Just I guess we'll just
I th- I
like
let's go over both
yeah,
of
we'll
them
just go over
together.
both of them
I agree
together.
with you. I agree with you on visuals. I disagree on animation because of how some of the humans are animated is very poor compared to the rest of the competition. I'm putting this in the context of this is 1999. There have been decades of 2D animation. I think the robot animation is stellar. I think the human
Well, that's
animation is
something that they
lacking.
do, which is interesting in the film. That the so obviously this is a period of time when CG started being incorporated into animation, and the way that that's primarily done in this movie is the Iron Giant
Is
himself
the robot.
being a
Yep.
CG
Which
model.
again I think is stellar because obviously Toy Story
Yeah,
pioneered that, but I don't think it was a known commodity when it came to, especially, sure, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit had that kind of technology and that kind
yeah.
of thing, but when Toy Story came around, that's when CGI started, and I see that with the giant. It's got a few things. It's a bit like the tree ints for me in Lord of the Rings. It's very of the time, and you
Yeah.
can tell that, but I don't think that detracts
No, I
from it
think they
because of the fact that we were still getting
yeah.
that technology. And I wouldn't detract that for the giant because it's still being developed. I would detract it because the 2D is a little bit, it's a little bit poor in spots, quite a few
Something
actually.
that they do though really smartly with the giant is that they created visual imperfections within the actual lines and
I
stuff
saw that.
within the giant to make him blend more into the 2D environments and with the other 2D characters in the world. There's also just something that I think is really tremendous in this movie is, and this is going into the actual character animation and the actual thing. So you get shots where it's like the Iron Giant picks up Hogarth and he's walking with him, and you have Hogarth kind of like he's gets knocked over a bit from the wind, and he like grabs the Iron Giant's finger and like pulls himself back up. Little details like that that aren't necessary, but the movie goes out of its way to constantly have these little details that really give you a good sense of scale and weight to it. That's where
I
animation kind
agree,
of
but there's also shots, and I know I'm contradicting myself with the robot, but there's also shots of him grabbing the metal from the power plant, which is very very
there's
awkward.
a little
It's an
there's a little
awkward
bit of that,
shot.
but for me in this movie it works because I think there's a differentiation.
You know what I've figured out what the animation style in the animation reminds me of. Did you ever play uh what is it called? It's like Dragon's Lair and the space version, which I can't.
Oh, like those
I'm
are
going
like
eventually going to
those little
remember
animatic kind of games.
the laser
Yeah,
disc. Yeah,
those are actually done
animation.
by
It looks exactly like
it.
that.
Look, that's actually done by Don Bluth too. So those are Don Bluth productions.
Correct. But that was also in the 80s and the
Yeah, so the
70s.
'80s.
So like I said, I don't know if they were going for the aesthetic that this was animated in the 70s or in the 80s. That makes sense then, but I don't suspect that they were. I think it's just they had not the top tier
They didn't. They
animators.
actually didn't. They had a bunch of first timers, and they had some people that, because all of the other, like the biggest animators and stuff, were taken up by Disney. So this is
We're
kind of
all
a scrappy
Disney, yeah.
team. But I love,
And even DreamWorks
I
was getting the
love this kind
best.
of scrappy quality that the movie has. It doesn't look as polished as other things, but I think for me that adds to its charm. So I know what you're saying with it. Maybe it's not the most polished looking animation, but I like that more than some of the more polished looking animation, because I think that this movie just captures that really well. And like I said, there's an attention to detail with like the weight of things, like the weight of the giant and the way that characters interact with each other and stuff like that, that really kind of stands out to me very significantly.
The other point that I would give, and this would be more so impact, that I'm watching the trailer right now, and it's because of the unpolished, and I you might find it charming, and to an extent I do as well, but that absolutely hurts the marketing and that kind of aspect from the
It hurts the
movie.
marketing maybe,
So
but it
I
doesn't hurt
think
the storytelling.
it might be, I'm not talking about the storytelling, I'm talking about the look of
Right,
it.
I know. But I never found the look of it
But
distracting from the storytelling. I thought the animation that they did for the movie only ever enhanced the storytelling. I never got taken out of it personally.
that might just be an agree
Okay,
to
but
disagree.
we have to agree to disagree on, is this a 1 or a 2 in animation?
Correct.
Because I would put it down as a pretty hard 2.
Man. And like I said, I would do that for visuals. I don't think I would agree for animation.
Okay, we'll circle back to it then. We'll go to editing.
Yep.
The editing is fantastic. Like I said, it's a very brief movie. It's an hour and 26 minutes, and it feels like it's the exact right amount of time. Everything in the movie,
Yeah, the
right?
pacing is real
There's a
good.
good consistency to the way the movie looks throughout. That, that's also important to the editing, and it's all just, they're great sequences. I don't know. I feel like editing for me is a really solid 2 here.
Okay. I will agree with that, actually.
Okay. Sound. Okay, sound is, whenever we talk about a movie, I don't, there's, it's,
Score plus sound mixing plus
score,
sound
sound
editing
mixing,
is
sound editing.
typically what I do.
I think that sound is one of the more, it's one of the most important things about filmmaking, and it's one of the things that gets messed up when it comes to major theatrical distribution style productions the least amount, because I don't know, I feel like there are movies that mess up sound stuff, but I think that we give out 2s to sound a lot because sound is just such an important aspect of filmmaking, and I think filmmakers understand that, and most of the time movies aren't going to mess this up. I think that in this case the movie does a great job with.
I suspect I know a good reason why, especially in the film industry. So I happen to know, don't ask me how because I couldn't tell you, but Foley artists, of course you
Yep.
know what those are. Yeah, so even though there is a database when it comes to all these kinds of Foley sound effects and that kind of thing that have already been done that are very high quality, we still use Foley artists for every single movie, and Foley artists have to be in every single movie.
Yeah.
So it's all bespoke, kind of. It's all very.
Yeah, and especially in animation where everything is completely created from scratch. That's dominate, like
Right.
all of the sound stuff comes from
and
that.
and that's why we keep giving everything too. It's all because they have to pay a certain amount for
Yeah.
Foley artists, whereas they could just pay for the licensing for
You
sounds that have already been
really,
created that are probably
yeah,
just as good.
people
But
really
yeah,
notice when the sound is off in a movie, and so it's like that's why
yep.
that's why it's such a big deal with the Christopher Nolan films when those came out, that people couldn't hear dialogue. Even in the Across the Spider-Verse, the original release of that, like, had some sound issues.
Which is why I'm glad that Oppenheimer came out, because
He did
really
fix that a
fixed
lot
that.
in Oppenheimer.
Oh man, I could
So
actually hear. I could
yeah,
hear
it's
Cillian
more
Murphy.
noticeable when you have great audio. It's not necessarily that noticeable, but when you have bad audio, it is extremely noticeable. So that's why with audio, it's
So
kind of like a lot of movies are going to get a 2 in that category, but that's because the attention to that needs to be in a way where you don't notice it. And if you're, yeah.
so do you think we need to up our bar when it
No,
comes
I'm
to
not saying that
2s?
at all. I think that that's just a general case for most movies. If they're done, if the audio is done well, and that's why we also include the score in the audio too, because if a movie has a notably like lackluster score, then that could hurt the audio aspect of it.
Well, there is a, I think, because the score is still in the first half as well as the second half, and there's still 50s music choices in the first half as well as
Yeah.
some of the second half. Whereas for Are You There, God It's Me, Margaret, it's the first half is all 70s songs and 60s songs, and the second half is
Right.
all just score or nothing at all. So I quite like when it's intertwined instead of just music in one part and just score in the second part, or in the case of Suicide Squad, where it's just songs that are mishmash for the sake of, we bought a
Right.
bunch of songs or we licensed a bunch of songs. Might as well use it at any time instead of thinking
Yeah.
about it. But
Yeah, I guess I just
or in the case of like Baby Driver, where he wrote
to the music.
scenes surrounding songs. Exactly.
I think that there are movies that use it exceptionally, but I think that most movies are going to be doing sound well. So
Feels like we should probably raise the bar for that's what I'm thinking.
in this case, I mean, I would say that this is very much a 2. I think that they really capture, especially with like the differences in the old-timey commercials versus the movie's audio, and kind of representing the time period, and just also the clarity and the quality of the voice acting and everything. I think that this movie is definitely a 2. I think that they do a great job.
It's also got a really good I'm probably going to mess up the exact scene placement, but after Kent Mansley goes to the restroom because obviously he was given laxative on purpose, it goes immediately into a choice like music. Before it even cuts over, it plays the start of the music, which I find to be very, very good. That choice to immediately start a different tone for another scene before the cut is very interesting to me, and it hits. And I will say it's very difficult for me to get choked up, but the final 2 scenes regarding the giant and Hogarth actually kind of did, because and I think the music is a big part of that, because it's subtle music. It's obviously somber music, but it works. So
Yeah.
I'm going to agree completely. Sound is a 2.
All right. So Impact. Okay, let's just talk about Impact, because Impact to me is the most interesting category for this movie in particular, because this movie didn't make money. It wasn't impactful very much in terms of its relevance in the year that it came out, because it bombed really bad, but it did a couple of really key things that has made it extremely lasting. And part of that, I think, is just how good the movie is, and having a lasting quality for the people who watch it and then share it. Word of mouth on this movie. Most people know what this movie is. Not everybody's seen it to the same level that, like, let's just use a Tarzan, for example. I feel like more people have probably still seen Tarzan in time than have seen The Iron Giant. But I think The Iron Giant has more of an impact on the people who have seen it than Tarzan does for most people. And there's a couple of interesting things to kind of reflect this too, where one is that the movie is continually referenced today, and not just referenced, but like billion-dollar movies like Minions parodies The Iron Giant in its finale, which I don't like that movie, but it does parody The Iron Giant in its finale. Movies like Ready Player One from Steven Spielberg prominently feature The Iron Giant,
right?
Including the new Space Jam also prominently featured The Iron Giant. And in the Warner Brothers Smash Bros. Clone game, The Iron Giant is one of the marquee characters that they advertised as one of the playable characters in that game. So
the Cartoon Network Super Smash Bros.
Multiverses, I think it's called. Yeah, but they really marketed like Iron Giant's in this game. Isn't that cool? And it's like, yeah, because Iron Giants has had this very lasting cultural impact despite the movie.
It's kind of funny. It feeds on this nostalgia for people who
didn't exactly. It's a strange kind of phenomenon. I love seeing him pop up in things just because I know that this movie connects with people. It just does.
Something I will say, because it didn't make money, that's probably the reason why Brad Bird eventually went to Pixar.
Right.
So it did give us 2 very, very good animated movies afterwards, too.
Not only did Brad Bird just go to Pixar, he became one of the foundational people at Pixar and made movies that went on to make $1 billion. Incredibles 2 made over $1 billion at the box office. Incredibles 1 obviously made a ton of money as well, and so did Ratatouille. And then he went on to make other live action movies, and he's got other projects coming. He's been a notable presence, both as producer for other Pixar projects and his own Pixar projects. And he wouldn't have had those opportunities if he didn't make this movie, and if this movie wasn't as good as it was. Because as a financial disaster, usually you might take a hit in your career, but Brad Bird made The Incredibles, which came out in 2004, which was, you know, he pretty much went right over to Pixar and started working on that movie, you know? So, like,
Yeah.
I think that because of its continued pop culture relevance and the influence of launching Brad Bird's career and the kind of career that he's had, despite the fact that I would usually dock a movie for, you know, being a financial failure in the impact category, I do think that this movie is extremely influential to animation as a medium. I think that animators always point to this movie as being an inspiration. And then also industry wise, I think that with Brad Bird's career and once again the continued relevance of the Iron Giant character, I think that this movie is a 2 in impact, despite the fact that it was a box office bomb.
So I do have one question. So does that mean we would have to give Fast and the Furious a 2?
Yes.
Any of them?
I would,
Oh,
okay,
no.
maybe not any of them, but the first one, I wouldn't say
Drift.
that. I wouldn't necessarily say that for Tokyo Drift, but or some of the other middle ones. But you know, I would give 1 a 2, and I would give 7 a 2, and I'd give 5 a 2. But beyond that, I don't know if I'd give any one of them a 2 for, you know, that kind of sake. But there are a few in that franchise that I would give a 2 in impact, which is where it's like impact is an interesting category because it doesn't necessarily fully reflect our feelings on the movie. It just reflects.
It also is a mishmash. Typically, we would go with, did it make money? Did
Right.
it have accolades? Not necessarily pop culture. Because we gave, what did we give
We
Network,
gave Network
a 2?
a 2.
Yeah, we gave it a
because-
2.
Yeah.
Even though it's never talked about at all. Sure, it
Because
made
it has
money,
more
not
interesting,
too much
yeah, it has
money,
more
but it had
industry impact,
accolades.
you know, and it had a lot of accolades.
Yeah. So
So that's why impact is very subjective, but that's my personal take on it. If you have a different take on it, feel free to share.
I agree with all those points. I just
Because I would say that with all of those things that have happened with the character, both licensing out the character to other things and, you know, sales on, you know, products revolving around the character, this movie might have, you know, turned a profit way, you know, over time. Because, I mean, Ready Player One was a Universal movie. How much did they pay to have the Iron Giant so prominently featured and recreated in that movie? It's just like that movie
Right.
the Iron Giant's probably made money over time, despite its failings at the box office originally. So that's just my opinion on it. So yeah, like I said, if you feel strongly about it differently, just let me know. But I feel like it's a 2, personally.
the thing is I don't, but because we keep changing what impact means week after week, it makes it tough to determine to me what is a 2.
I think it's the most subjective
Yes,
of all
it's-
of them for sure. But I do like analyzing a movie's
Yeah.
impact and place in culture.
I have no good
Yeah.
reason not to give it a 2, but
Mm.
it doesn't feel like a 2 to me.
All right, well then I guess we'll just give it a 2 and move on. Unless you have an objection. Which brings us back to the animation category, which has now become something with more stakes, because will this become our second perfect movie in a row? And second for the show, or is this
Correct.
a 19 out of 20?
I
consider this to be a perfect movie, and I love the animation. I've made my case for it. And
ooh.
yeah, if you want to fight me on the animation for one, then have your argument.
I mean, I already
Yeah,
kind of did.
you just see it as a bit rougher.
I find it's not just a bit rougher. I mean, I can tell that the animation for Hogarth and for Dean and for Annie and for Kent, they feel like 4 different animators animated them, and it's jarring to me. Not enough for me to not like the movie at all. Even I still like the movie. It's still weird to me. I'm not very passionate about this movie because of the fact that I appreciate it, but I don't see it as, there are, in my opinion, probably a dozen better animated movies.
Well, if there's only a dozen better animated movies, this is still one of the best animated movies.
Like overall. I'm not talking just just animation alone. I'm talking overall there are a dozen that I can think of off the top of
I
my
see what
head.
you're saying.
Yeah. It when it getting too hung up on this because it doesn't really make that much of a difference. I'm still gonna say one if you want to do the flip a
All
coin thing.
because you feel
I'm
so
not gonna
because you feel
I'm not
strongly
gonna budge
about
on this.
this, and
There's not many things for this movie that I feel strongly about not giving a two. Animation is
yeah,
probably
and
the biggest
I'll,
one.
yeah,
Either that or Impact, but Impact I can't come up with a good knowing our parameters of Impact. I have no idea how to argue against a two because our parameters change so
yeah.
often.
I mean, it's really a movie to movie kind of thing. So, but the animation, I'll
Yep.
give you the one because first of all, you said there was this like it felt like it was amateur animators, and it was, and it was kind of a B team of animators kind of coming together to do this, and
And normally I would give them a pass, but not for $70 million. Um,
all right, so then
yeah.
it just misses out on our
I
on our
mean,
second perfect
I,
score, being a 19 out of 20.
I mean
I mean,
9.5 is way better
that's
than
incredible,
most
and like
people
I
think of
said,
it, though.
I I'm gonna fight for this movie till the day I die because I love this movie. This one's it's very special to me. So yeah, definitely one of my personal favorites. So I'm happy to see it get rated so high. But yeah, I understand what you're saying about it.
I can hear the
I
disappointment
wanted it to be 20 out
in
of
your
20, but
voice.
I understand what you're saying, and I'll give it to you.
Well, you should have picked something other than animation because if I'm differentiating visuals and animation, then I have to argue my case that it's not perfect when it comes to
Right. I guess
both.
it comes down to what do you see as perfect?
So,
Like is it technical perfection, or is it, I feel like there's an emotional weight to the animation and the way that they choose to do it that is better
yeah.
than other things that are.
I'm I'm not arguing perfection for most things. Sometimes I argue perfection for writing and characters, but when it comes to animation, it's way more subjective. And also, I'm pinning it up against the animation for
Okay.
its
I see what you're saying.
contemporaries, which is Pixar and
Yeah.
DreamWorks and Disney.
No, no.
So
I I
it's
check your
good,
points. That's why I
but
gave into your one. So I understand what you're saying.
I'm just I'm just I'm just I'm just making it so
I
that
mean,
I'm
I'm
not the reason that you're
disappointed and you are
disappointed.
the
Okay.
reason, but I can't be that
Okay,
disappointed when it's
Hoobastank.
1 point off of
Jeez.
perfect on a score that is between two of us on a
On
casual
a
score that
casual
we
score that
right
we made up on the spot. We made up in
that
this over the
yeah that we
span of
also
30
said
minutes.
wasn't
Calm down.
reflective of either of our necessarily opinions.
I'm gonna be honest. There are some problems that I had with Network when it came to some of the things, but it's
Right. Well,
more
that's why we
so
don't go
the
to three,
subjective
because
kind.
three is like
So
absolutely perfect. We're not rating it.
yeah,
It's just good or great.
yeah.
So
Which man, the Fast and the Furious movies, 30 out of
hey, if
30,
we did
man.
Fast and Furious, hey, if we
30
did the
out of
first
20.
Fast
Sorry,
and
30 out of
Furious
20.
and it got a 2 for impact, I
And
still don't think it
oh,
would get a very high score.
no, absolutely, that'd
Yeah,
probably be the
so
only
like,
two.
I think it all kind of it balances out in its own weird way. But yeah, that'll do it for this week's conversation around the Iron Giant. If you agree or disagree, we got a little bit tense there with our scoring at the end, but that's part of the fun of the show. So, um, I don't know what our next week's movie is. That's what our next week's movie is. I don't know what next week's movie is. That's Kyle's decision. So Kyle knows.
I do.
So Kyle, what is next week's movie?
So you'd be proud of me. I actually watched more, especially newer movies than I have in a while. I probably watched 7 movies over the last week.
Oh wow, nice.
I gave some thought. Originally, I was going to do The Father, which the Anthony Hopkins
Oh
movie
yeah,
that earned him an Oscar.
I saw that movie.
Originally, I was going to do that, but
Yeah,
man, I
it's a hard
cannot.
one to watch again, especially my grandma had. Yeah, my grandma had Alzheimer's, so like that was a rough watch for me.
Yeah, but we've been on a hot streak of good writing and good movies. I mean, um, this movie, Network, Margaret, Untouchables, Pitch Black. I know they're all good. Um, so I wanted to focus on something that neither of us have seen. I doubt you have seen
Okay.
this one. I would be impressed if you have seen this movie. It's by what I would consider a one-hit wonder director because it's his
Okay.
only feature film that he directed. He got an uncredited direction, uh, well, uncredited, in a different movie. Um, it is The Night of the Hunter. It's 1955.
Oh, I wanted to watch this, but I didn't. Like a few months ago, I almost watched it,
Mhm.
but I didn't. So this works out.
I've heard a lot about this movie, oddly enough, even though it feels like a very niche movie. But I wanted to go with something that neither of us have seen that people consider great, and it's a older movie. I was originally going to go with The Father. I was actually originally going to go. So obviously, I started with In Bruges and Network. Those are actually two of my top 5 favorite movies. I was actually just going to complete the top 5 while we're still a young podcast.
Oh
but
yeah.
I realized that probably best to save some of those for later because opinions change and that kind of thing, and my top 5 can shift, even though it hasn't in a long while.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah,
Yeah, Night of the
So,
Hunter,
Night of the Hunter.
1955.
Yep.
That's definitely the most classic movie that we've done so far. So yeah, I'm excited. Like I said, I almost watched this like a few weeks back, so I'm glad that you picked
Yep.
it. Yeah, so that'll do it for this week's episode of Great American Movie Review. We'll see you back next Thursday for The Night of the Hunter. Thank you for joining us this week for the Great American Movie Review. Be sure to join us back here every Thursday for new episodes.